Okay, so I want to talk about how I got into TTRPGs outside of D&D. Now, I'll give a little bit of backstory here. I've been playing D&D for about 7 years now, and I guess technically that's like, I've been playing TTRPGs in general for 7 years, but it was specifically I started with D&D. Now, I started playing D&D by going to a local game shop that was hosting public games where anyone could come in and just play, which I thought that was really, really cool. My brother got into it initially. He listened to the Adventure Zone, got really obsessed, and was like, I'm gonna go play this game at this game shop. I don't even know how he found it, but all I know is that he was going to it first, and then I was kind of getting a little bit interested, but my mom's like, you should just go with him one time and see what happens. I played it for the first time. I got the last kill on some monster. I felt so cool, and I got hooked ever since. Now, I played a lot of games after that, both public games and then what we called private games, which are just usually normal TTRPGs, when you put together a group and you're like, hey, let's play a game. But at the time, it felt like, okay, there's public games and private games. And so I played a good combination of both of those. With both pre-written and also homebrew campaigns, and it was an absolute blast. I'll be honest, when I first started to play D&D, I was not a very good role player or someone who really got much into character. I never did any role play things online before. I never was really good at doing voices or anything like that, and all the people who I thought were really good role players at the table would do those exact things. Over time, I found that that's not really the thing that makes you good at role playing, and I found my own style with that and how it makes me comfortable, and so I've definitely gotten better over time. But it's just kind of funny to reflect on that versus now I'm super into the more role play narrative focused game where we're all telling stories and being in character most of the time. So fun stuff. Now, how I specifically got into TTRPGs outside of D&D is I was listening to the Adventure Zone as well because obviously my brother was listening to it. I'm like, okay, what is this all about? I listened to their first campaign balance, absolutely loved it, and when they moved on to Amnesty, I'm like, okay, I'll do this as well. And so I listened to Amnesty. I absolutely loved that campaign, probably one of my favorites that the Adventure Zone has done. And I will be honest, at the time, I did not realize that it was a different TTRPG other than D&D. It never quite clicked in my mind of oh, they're using different rules and different dice and all of these things. I just okay, D&D, I guess. And around that time too, I heard things about Pathfinder, which all I knew was that it was a math game. That's all the impression that I got when I heard about it. I also heard a little bit about Vampire the Masquerade and Call of Cthulhu, but again, none of those really clicked that they were separate games. I just thought they were different types of stories that you could play in D&D. So I'm like, okay, that sounds interesting, but I'm fine doing this. But it was a few years later when I moved to Florida, and I'll be honest, I don't like Florida. But it was the first Christmas of after I moved down to Florida, which I'm moving out soon, which I'm very excited about. But it was the first Christmas of when I was down in Florida. I remember I was around that time I was getting super into my D&D campaign. I bought a bunch of the D&D books, but then hey Danny, and then I said to my brother, hey, it would be really cool if I got some other, really fun, TTRPG things. And he decided that he didn't want to get me anything D&D related. He didn't want to get me dice or anything like that. So he looked into starter sets for Animal Adventures and Call of Cthulhu. And he got me those for Christmas. And that actually finally, opened my eyes of, hold on. These are other games. Animal Adventures, I will say, is a simplified D&D, but Call of Cthulhu is straight up a different game than D&D. And so I'm like, all right, this is interesting, but hold on. When I listened to Amnesty from the Adventure Zone, was that a different game too? And so I looked into it. I'm like, okay, I looked at and saw what they played, and it was called Monster of the Week. I'm like, all right, I'll look into this further. I deep dive on, and I took a deep dive of trying to find out what this game was. And it took me a while to find the actual book of it and any information on it, because I wasn't quite sure what I was looking for yet until I finally found it. And here it is here. And so I got the game, and about like a week or so later, I decided to just start reading it. I've never been a huge reader in my life. I've never gotten into like fiction books. I've always been a fan of more nonfiction books. And I've never really read any of the D&D books, so I don't really know what caused me to read Monster of the Week specifically, outside of like, okay, it's a different game, I'll just see what's up. And so I started to read it. And I got hooked because I'm like, what is this? What do you mean you're using just 2d6? What are these things called moves? Okay, what are the playbooks? How do those work? What are the moves with that? How are those moves different than the basic moves? I had all of these questions, and so I just kept going through the book. And more I read, the more obsessed I became with the game. And so Monster of the Week was my first ever look at a TTRPG outside of D&D. I heard about these other ones. I had Call of Cthulhu and Animal Adventures at the time, but I didn't actually like fully read through them. And this was the first one that I did. And it has changed my perspective on TTRPGs so much because, it's a Powered by the Apocalypse game. It uses a completely different style of rules and play style than D&D does, and so it was like a big switch, and I'm like, this is really cool. And I don't even remember what games came next, but I just know that I like kept researching. I'm like, okay, I'll get Call of Cthulhu. Okay, I'll get Vampire the Masquerade. And then I saw this game called Vaesen. That looked pretty cool. And then Merkborg. Oh wait, what's that? Thirsty Sword Lesbians, Blades in the Dark, Into the Odd, Electric Bastionland. Those were introduced to me by some friends. Wander Home, The Quiet Year, all of these different games that I never heard of before. And so many that are so different to what I was used to, which was D&D. And so slowly I just started to I don't know which way it is, build up the collection that you see behind me. And every single Christmas and birthday ever since, I always ask for TTRPG books because I'm like, this game looks cool and this game looks cool, so if you want to get me anything, get me those. And so there's a good chunk of those games that have actually come from my family just gifting me games. I think it was like Kids on Brooms, Coyote and Crow, Root, Merkborg was a gift as well, Masks the New Generation. These have all been gifts, and I love them to death. But, I also kept reading those books. Beyond Monster of the Week, I'm like, okay, Thirsty Sword Lesbians is a Powered by the Apocalypse game. How is that different? How does that compare to Monster of the Week? So I would read it, and then I would get really hooked on like, okay, this is this book's interpretation on this game. And then, I get into Blades in the Dark, and I see where it has relations to Powered by the Apocalypse, but also how it's a completely different system, and how really cool the devil's bargaining mechanic is. And also I really like the position and effect rolls. I haven't played Blades fully, but I want to. Vaesen, I ended up reading when Hurricane Ian hit. We lost like power for a full day, and then we lost power for a full day, and then we didn't have any internet for like a week. And so Vaesen and Blades in the Dark were my two books that I read during that entire time, and I am thoroughly hooked on Vaesen. Also, I don't know if I'm saying it right, Vaesen or Vasen. Is it Vasen? I don't know. Ugh. I don't know Swedish, but I apologize if I am pronouncing it incorrectly. That's just how I've assumed that it was pronounced. But slowly I started to learn about all of these games. And then I started my podcast, and with the whole thing around it being like, introducing people to new games, it also introduced me to a million new games. And so I have like expanded my collection just from running the podcast. Bunkers and Badasses and Alice is Missing were like two big ones where I actually learned it from the podcast. And those are just ones I have physically on the shelf. And I got really obsessed with the idea about these games. And, beyond that, I've just like immersed myself. I always looked at any TTRPG Kickstarter that would pop up on my feed. Even if I didn't end up getting the game, I would at least look at it. I got a bunch of games from Kickstarter. We have The Zone over here, which is like a horror RPG. Really, really cool, by the way. Castaway's another one that I got from a Kickstarter, and just like it has built so much from that. And then, I get itch bundles, and that has a million games in it, and I don't know, it's just been really amazing. But that's been kind of my journey of getting into TTRPGs outside of D&D. It took me maybe a year to start playing my first ever non-D&D game when I first got introduced to the idea that there were other games out there. And that started with Monster of the Week because I love this game. And so we decided to, or not we, I decided to run a Monster of the Week campaign. That lasted for a little while. The game ended up ending, which I'm still sad about, but I will be playing this again in the future because, again, I really love this game. But this was just like, this opened my eyes to the world of TTRPGs and what was really out there beyond D&D. I've never been a huge fantasy person myself. I can appreciate fantasy, but kind of the Lord of the Rings, higher fantasy type style has never been something I've been particularly interested in. And so, I loved playing D&D, and it was super, super fun, but that was never, man, I'm really excited to play D&D to play through these fantasy stories, zero to hero. Well, that's a fun trope, and I would love to do that one day. It felt cool being able to find a game that matched a style of media that I actually knew and was more comfortable with. I watched a lot of Supernatural, and so Monster of the Week is literally a TTRPG designed to mimic those style of shows. Supernatural, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, X-Files. They literally make references to Dean and Sam Winchester in this book. Like, I love it. Because I was familiar with those types of stories, and so I got really excited to run a game like that. And I got really excited to run a game like that because I knew how that worked. And you can even see I have like a bunch of little tabs where I marked everything. And yeah, no, I love it. And so this Monster of the Week was my start in TTRPGs, and it has been an amazing ride ever since. I love, love, love Vaesen. Bunkers and Badasses is also just such a genius idea for a game. Alice's Missing is so unique in the way that it's like a silent role-playing game. I've even found games that I probably would rank higher than Monster of the Week, though this is still definitely within like my top 5 games. But like Apocalypse Keys, that's a game that absolutely blew me away when I first read it. It's so insanely interesting. In the way that you basically play as these like powerful monsters, like trying to stop the apocalypse when you could literally become someone who could start the apocalypse. It's just really cool. There's also games that I've had on the podcast that I learned about since, Cottages and Cerberuses is one that I talked about on the podcast with the designer. And then I got to play it on a show called Roleplay Rejects. And I was already in love with the game just from talking about it. And then I got to play it and I'm so thoroughly obsessed. But yeah, I might be rambling a little bit here, but that's just because, like, genuinely TTRPGs just make me really, really excited. So, yeah, if you want to start your journey into TTRPGs, I would definitely recommend checking out my podcast, because that is literally the whole concept of the show. It is to introduce other people to TTRPGs outside of D&D. With having like fun conversations with people who love them or create them, which means they can talk from their experience of what they like about the game, and you can listen to that and see if it matches with what you like in games, and you can check it out from there. It's, even though like I love that it can be a resource for other people and other people can learn about games, it is also just such a pleasure for me to learn about new games, because like every single episode I'll like make notes of any like TTRPG or design or anything that's mentioned. I'm like, okay, I gotta check that out. I've even gotten games that have been mentioned on the show just because I thought they were really cool. So yeah, I love doing that show a lot. I love doing the podcast so very much and learning about all these games. So if you want to learn about games, check that out. Also, I guess I'll mention I have a Patreon. So if you do want to support the RPG Goblin podcast, also the YouTube channel and TikTok and stuff like that, consider checking that out in the description of this video and supporting if you can. We're going to have monthly TTRPG parties where I'm going to talk about games that I'm excited about, and games that I'm reading, and have on guests who are also going to talk about games that they love. We're going to have giveaways of fun TTRPG related things and stuff like that. It's going to be a really great time, hosted in my Discord, and yeah. So thank you for watching and learning about my journey of getting into TTRPGs.